You may have seen bottles with mash bills that look like Wild Turkey but labels that don't carry the name, or whiskey fans whispering Buff Turkey about some ultra-aged bottles. What is Buff Turkey bourbon? How did it come to be? And which brands are selling it right now? Today we're unpacking the story behind this mashup of two legendary distilleries. Buffalo Trace distilling Wild Turkey's recipe barrels, aging at Wild Turkey, and the mysterious path from distiller to non-distiller bottler. Let's dive in. Before we go deeper, if you love whiskey stories, barrel lore, and rare release breakdowns, hit that like button and subscribe to World of Whiskey. Ring the bell. I've got more crazy bourbon stories coming. Now let's get into Buff Turkey. The term Buff Turkey, often stylized Buff Turkey, refers to bourbon that was contract distilled at Buffalo Trace using Wild Turkey's mash bill, 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malted, then shipped to Wild Turkey's warehouses to age. This arrangement reportedly came about during Wild Turkey's expansion phase. At one point, Wild Turkey needed extra production help, so they contracted Buffalo Trace to distill some of their whiskey. Once matured, Wild Turkey decided they wouldn't use those barrels under their own label because the liquid was considered too different from their house profile. So instead, they sold those barrels to non-distiller producers. The ages usually run 14 to 16 years, though some enthusiasts claim older barrels have surfaced. Because of this lineage, Buff Turkey bourbon has become a niche prestige category, rare, whispered about, and heavily traded, often commanding hundreds of dollars at retail for just a single bottle. When Wild Turkey was expanding, after being acquired, they needed extra distilling capacity to meet demand. Instead of building more stills immediately, they outsourced selected mash bill runs to Buffalo Trace. Buffalo Trace would distill using their own infrastructure, but with the Wild Turkey mash bill, or at least as claimed in many reports, then the barrels were sent to Wild Turkey for aging. However, once aged, Wild Turkey deemed the flavor profile off from what they wanted for their brand. It didn't align well with their established stylistic expectations. So instead of integrating it, they opted to sell off the barrels. These barrels then became available to NDPs, often under strict non-disclosure terms, so the labeling does not explicitly show Buffalo Trace or Wild Turkey. I definitely understand why Wild Turkey did this, but it would have been really awesome if they used these to start a limited brand or some crazy single barrels. Over time, whiskey geeks and label sleuths began identifying them via barrel stickers, mash bill matches, DSP codes, and tasting notes. The name Buff Turkey emerged as a nickname in whiskey circles. Because they use the Wild Turkey mash bill but are distilled by Buffalo Trace Buff, turkey barrels tend to lean somewhat more toward Buffalo Trace style sweetness, yet maintain the higher rye backbone of Wild Turkey. Common tasting notes: cherry, oak, caramel, baking spice, herbal, divided by botanical hints, and sweetness. Some express that many variants show a more buffalo lean signature than typical Wild Turkey. Because they're aged for 14 to 16 years, a lot of oak influence and deep fruit character comes through. Some barrels are praised for being lush and sweet rather than dry or overly tannic. But variation is wide. Each barrel is different, influenced by warehouse location, barrel char, and aging conditions. Some are extraordinary, some are less so. In blind tastings, critics note differences from standard WT or BT bottles. Example, in Reddit, someone compared a Buff Turkey sample to buttery sugared oak, leathery tannin, transitioning into acidic yellow cherries. Let's look at some known bottles and brands that are suspected or confirmed to have Buff Turkey barrels. Dark Arts Whiskey House. They've publicly marketed Buff Turkey blends divided by single barrels. For example, their 15-year single barrel Omnia Vanitas is widely discussed as Buff Turkey. Some of their releases list tasting notes like macerated berry, sour cherry, candy, etc., consistent with descriptions of buff turkey. Augusta Buckner's 15-year single barrel buff turkey. Most of the Buckner's high-aged single barrel releases are confirmed as buff turkey OKI. 16-year. This release is often cited in buff turkey discussions. Some sources call it a buff turkey release. K&L Liquors Every Drop Batch KY0125. This batch is listed with Distillery unstated but using the wild turkey mash bill, and many believe it is a buff turkey barrel. River Roots has multiple releases that are allegedly buff turkey barrels. Sealbox 15-year batch 1 and batch 2. Some Sealbox 15-year batches are confirmed to use buff turkey barrels rather than single barrel. New Era Whiskey and Spirits. New Era is one of the NDPs that openly embraced the buff turkey term. They sourced multiple barrels and released them under their own label, Magnolia SN. Magnolia 16 years listed among brands suspected of buff turkey origin. Bluegrass Elkwood Reserve 15-year. Another brand that appears in buff turkey discussion. They are among the early labels suspected to bottle it. These examples show how these barrels have been parceled out to boutique and selective labels. Because NDP bottlers must remain discreet about origins, much of the identification is via mash bill, barrel stickers, age, and aroma comparisons. Buff turkey has generated intense hype in bourbon communities. Some bottles have traded for prices well above retail. Estimates of how many barrels exist vary. Some insiders say 1,000 barrels, others suggest up to 10,000, though that is likely exaggerated. Pricing for NDPs. Many bottle releases land in the $250 to $400 range. On the secondary market, some bottles fetch anywhere from $500 and up. Hype, rarity, and scarcity drive this. There is debate among collectors and purists. Some say it's deserved liquid, others say the narrative hype overshadows quality variation. Buff turkey is a fascinating case study in contract distilling, brand identity, and how the bourbon market handles anomalies. It raises questions. When is liquid too off-profile to carry a core brand name? It shows how NDPs and bottlers can resurrect hidden barrel stocks into highly collectible products. If you get a suspected buff turkey bottle, pay attention to mash bills, barrel codes, age statements, proof, and aroma flavor comparisons to both wild turkey and Buffalo Trace profiles can clue you in. In the future, if any similar contract barrels exist, they might become new legends. Buffalo Trace and wild turkey both have deep stocks and warehouses. More stories may emerge. So that's the story of buff turkey bourbon, the collaboration born out of necessity, the barrels that never carried the parent brand's name, and the niche of bottles that have become cult legends. What do you think? Have you tried any buff turkey bottles? Which ones? Drop your experiences in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this one, hit the like button, subscribe to World of Whiskey, and hit that bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into bourbon's hidden stories. Thanks for watching, and here's to discovering more whiskey mysteries.